Hi, this is Ben Welsh coming to you again from the LA Times newsroom. And in this video, we're going to cover how to use Markdown to better annotate and explain the work that goes on in your Jupyter notebooks. Now, if you've looked at any of the examples from our course or just seen Jupyter notebooks published by professionals both in the sciences and in the media, you've probably seen something like what I have on the screen right now. This is a notebook that we published at the Los Angeles Times data desk that included all the numbers and analysis that went into writing a story about H-2A visas in California. Now, H-2A visas are the documents that are given by the U.S. government to legal, temporary immigrants who work on farms all across the country. And we wrote a whole big story, a traditional news thing with photos and graphics and a lot of text about how there's been a big increase in the number of people doing this across the country and especially in California that was really based on some computer code that I wrote that analyzed a federal government database. And all that analysis work was included in a Jupyter notebook that I used to develop the story, but then I published here on github.com using Git and the notebook. And you can see that alongside all the Python code that I wrote, there's quite a bit of annotation where I've headlined the notebook, linked to my email, explained sort of our basic findings, and then as the page goes down, sort of explained at different steps kind of what I'm doing and how the different pieces fit together. I'm not the only one who's done this. There's many other examples of people who've done it before and even more thoroughly than us. Here's an example from BuzzFeed News where they documented an analysis of tennis match fixing patterns that they found looking at professional tennis data. And you can see that throughout their Python code, they've included a lot of explanation about kind of how the pieces fit together. Another example would be a recent ProPublica analysis, which used the Jupyter notebook and this annotation method to explain how they looked at a algorithm that assigned a recidivism risk score to people in the legal system in Florida and whether or not that was fair. And this is even actually in R code, but you can see that it has a very similar system of kind of explaining how the code works as it goes down. Now, this is something we've not covered so far in this class, but this is accomplished inside your Jupyter notebook using a tool called Markdown. Markdown is a markup language like HTML or many others that are out there like XML, etc., that allows you to format your text in a way that it's able to have headlines, bold things, italic things, hyperlinks, lists, all the basic things that go into formatting a document within the code, and you're able to create not just a long big stack of cells of Python code, but to intersperse with them sort of annotation and text that explains what you're up to, or really does about anything you want. Images are allowed, there's a lot of different options, and there's been quite a bit of creativity at using this. And so in this video, I'm going to show you really briefly how you can use Markdown to begin annotating your notebook. So before we begin, I'm going to return to the terminal where I am activated and inside my virtual environment that we've been using so far for this class. So to begin this lesson, you're going to need to start at exactly that point. If you're not there, just pause the video, move to your directory, activate it, and start it up again. But I'm already there, and to start my notebook, again, I'm just going to type Jupyter Notebook, just like we've done many times in the past, Jupyter with a Y. That will start up the Jupyter Notebook server and open up in my web browser a tab where I can begin annotating my code. So here I am where we left off in our last lesson, and where you may remember I renamed my notebook Prop64 Analysis. So I'm going to click on that file and open it up. And now my notebook is currently strictly Python code. There's no Markdown or other annotation that kind of explains what's going on. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin to introduce that. Now, one feature that is built into the notebook that you may not have noticed as we've been working so far is that every cell is able to contain different types of content. Now, by default, it's code, but one of the alternatives for a cell is Markdown. And that's available when you hit this pull down right here in the middle of the page. There's 4 different types of content that can go into a cell. Code is the default, it's what most of them will be, but you can see there's a second one called Markdown. And I want to create a new cell within my notebook, and then I want to convert it into a Markdown cell, and then I'm going to start writing in this language that allows me to format my text. So I'm going to click on the top cell because the first thing I want to do is create a headline at the very top where I describe what I'm doing. And I'm going to add a new cell by hitting the plus button right here as we've done before. You can see it's moved to the second spot, so I want to click on it and then hit the up arrow, which will move it up to the top spot. Now, to change the content of the cell, which is code by default, I'll need to hit this pull down and select Markdown. And you can see that the left-hand little Python thing here that we have on all of our other cells has disappeared. And this is changed to Markdown, signaling that Python code is no longer welcome in this cell. It's Markdown that's expected. Now, there's a lot of different tricks to working with Markdown, to linking in images and hyperlinks and other things. But let's start out really, really simple. Okay, to make a basic headline, like you might have at the top of your notebook, like you see in all 3 of these examples, right? They all have a big headline at the top. The way to create a headline in Markdown is to make a single # or hashtag and then a space. And whatever follows that single # will be a H1 in HTML or sort of a top level header for your document. And so here's now, after the # and the space, I simply need to name my notebook. I could call it Prop 64 Analysis. I could call it really anything I want. Since this is a very simple class called First Python Notebook, I'm going to call it My First Notebook. Though that's not strictly true in my case, but you should do that because it's your first notebook. All right, so # space, My First Notebook, or whatever you feel like headlining your notebook, and then hit the Enter key, which will move down to another line. And now in this other line, you're no longer in a header. You're just writing regular text. And I'm going to write some filler text just to take up space. One of my favorite things in computer programming, which is the traditional phrase, hello world. So I'm going to do # space, My First Notebook, enter, enter, and then hello world. You could really write anything you'd like, but I'm just going to do that as a start. And then I'm going to hit the play button. And now instead of running the code, you can see that the Markdown executes and it comes out as formatted text. And so that # that I've put in is reflected in how this has become very large bolded text of the size of a number 1 header. If I were to double click on that again, you can see I go back into editing mode and I see the code again. Now you can have, there's many levels of headers. There's a header 2, a header 3, and as you add more # the text gets smaller and the hierarchy is sort of changed. So if I do 2 and then hit play, you can see it's a little smaller than it was. If I take it back to 1 and hit play, it gets a little bigger. And that's how in these other notebooks they've been able to have headers of different sizes. The hyperlinks and all the other things are other things that are available in the documentation for this lesson. I'm going to link off to where you can find how to make tables and all sorts of other things. But this is just a really good first start at creating the top level of our notebook. I'm going to get rid of hello world because that's sort of nonsense. Just by deleting it and hitting play, it's now gone. And the way that I feel that people do a good job of this work is throughout the document at different places, sort of leaving notes about what they're doing and why, which then can help explain things to other programmers reading it, and it can also really help you, the programmer, if you come back to this code later on. And so just let's add a couple more here just as an example. You don't have to follow along with me if you don't want to. I just kind of want to make the point. But I could say add a cell here and move it above. And I want to say I am reading in the list of propositions and committees, right, from CSV. Oops, I got an error. That's because it's trying to run it as Python. So again, this is the reminder I'm trying to give you, which is you need to, every time you make a cell, if you want to do Markdown, you need to up here, convert it to Markdown, and hit play. Okay, there it says that. And then we can see the table coming out. Hey, let's add another one here for when we read in the contribs. And there's a shortcut to convert a cell to Markdown as you hit simply the M key on your keyboard, and that will shift it into Markdown mode. And now I'm going to say read in the list of contributions to ballot measures, right, which is what we're doing here. Hit the play button, and that's formatted. And you could go on and on throughout the document and continue to annotate it how you see fit. And this is a great thing to get in the habit of just kind of doing as you proceed, but I often see it as like crucial to the revision of my notebooks, where when I'm first exploring the data and filtering it this way and that way and sorting it this way and that way and trying to make sense of it. There's often sort of an experimental period where I don't document my work very well because I'm just sort of riffing on what's available. But then what's great about the notebook and Markdown is it creates an opportunity and a tool for you to use to go back and revise your code and rewrite it very soon after you initially write it, to tighten it and give it a little bit of sort of direction and focus. And especially when we're about to publish a story, I'll do a very tight sort of edit of all the code, including all that Markdown, so that it's very clear about what's happening, which helps me both proof my work, but also create something that's as succinct as possible. And to me, this is just sort of a natural part of gradually improving your code in the course of story development. Okay, so now there's many other things we could annotate, but we don't need to do that here on the video. I would challenge you, the student, to go and find a couple places and write some notes for yourself. All right, and I'm going to save my work by hitting the save disk. And now, to conclude this lesson, I'm going to go back to my terminal, and just as we did in the last video, I'm going to use Git to commit my work, just to again review the routine of working with Git. So I've saved my notebook, and now I'm back to my terminal. To use Git, I need to quit my terminal, which again is Control-C, and then a Y, and Enter. Okay, now I type git status, git space status. We'll spit out a status report. Where Git has detected, I've changed the file prop64 analysis. As you may recall, I need to add this file for changes so that Git is prepared to commit it. And again, that's git add prop-64. Again, I can hit tab to autocomplete this so I don't have to type it all and I can't make typos. Git add prop64 analysis.ipynb, or as maybe you recall from the last lesson, we could do asterisk ipynb, which would get them all. Let's try that. Great. Now I hit status, and you can see that that change to that file is now printed out in green, and my changes are prepared to be committed with Git. So again, we do git space commit -m, and I'm going to say inside quotes, added Markdown to notebook. Close quote. So git space commit space -m space quote, your message, however you see fit to summarize your work, quote to close it, and again, we hit enter and our changes have been logged. Congratulations, you've used Markdown and logged yet another change to your repository.